Hey Tyler, have you seen It Chapter 1 and It Chapter 2?
Yeah, 5 hours for just those two chapters, and I mean, I'm looking forward to the next 21 chapters, but I mean, it's already really long.
It might seem that way, but trust me, in the source material, there is so much more to go. We've got another 21 chapters, and then on top of that, there's five interludes plus an epilogue. There is plenty more story to go. We're going to be watching these movies for the next approximately 50 years or so.
Oh man. Yeah, they probably should have just made it a mini series, or
Yeah, right. Right. Yeah, if they tried to do this as a television miniseries, I don't know, let's say in the early 1990s, it would be a flawless masterpiece.
Right,
It
yeah.
would hold up. It would totally hold up. Hello and welcome to Ignore the Bell. My name is Nathan.
And I'm Tyler.
And today we are talking It Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. We're going to combine them together into one podcast. Before we get into the discussion, then we do have a sponsor for today's episode. So, our sponsor for today is Pennywise Financial Services. Parents, you might be thinking, where is all the money going? We're strapped for cash. These kids are taking up so much of our money. And I've got bad news. The thing is, they're only going to cost you more and more money the older they get. And that's not even getting into tuition. The average cost of raising a child from birth until the college years is hundreds of thousands of dollars. And if you've got 3 or 4 kids, you're probably thinking, there's got to be a way I can save some money. Well, there is. Contact Pennywise Financial Services today and just get rid of one or two of them. He'll take them off your hands at no charge to you. All you're going to do is save money. Penny wise, penny rich. Call them today.
Oh man, I hear they specialize in float accounts.
They do. They do. Yeah, it's really just a one man operation. Wears lots of different outfits.
Right.
Nude
Yeah.
older woman is one of my favorites. That
Oh
was a
man.
fun part.
Yeah, that is going to be taken out of context so quickly.
It's in the movie, people.
Oh man.
Oh, you go into the office. I see it's very casual Friday today, Pennywise.
Yeah, but yeah, so we've got 5 hours of movies to talk about. So I think we should probably get into it,
Yeah,
right?
we'll get right into it. All right, folks, I hope you enjoy.
Oh man, I wish this discussion could go on forever.
Ignore the bell. We're gonna keep going, people.
All right, we are talking It Chapter 1 and It Chapter 2. This is going to be, we were just talking about this kind of off air, that it's sort of a review of It Chapter 2, because the way we structure these is if we do a review of a new movie, then we put the timer for 30 minutes. But then if it's a bigger discussion on a bigger topic, then we go for an hour. And so it's sort of a review of It Chapter 2, but more of a discussion overall, I would say, of the It movies and the franchise and a little bit of Stephen King stuff, which I know that you're not like really much of a Stephen King fan, but I am. So I can speak to some of that stuff that happens within the Stephen King universe and the books and all of that.
Right. Yeah, and yeah, I did pick up on a few instances of turtles appearing in in
Yeah,
both of these films, which I
yeah,
know is important.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. And so the thing is I want to make this clear from the beginning because I think that it's challenging for me to look at these movies on their own. But and that's just because I've read the book a couple times. I've seen the original miniseries several times, and I saw it like at a really formative age. And
right.
so I'm pretty close to this stuff, and I know Stephen King material really, really well. And he's been a big influence on my own writing. And so it's hard for me to look at this film and not bring all of that background knowledge into it when I'm watching it. But I think that when you're talking about an adaptation of a book, an adaptation into film, then you have to treat the film on its own. You have to
Hmm.
evaluate it on its own merit. And it's hard to do that if you've actually read the source material.
Right. Yes. Now, I have not read the source material
Exactly. Yeah.
or seen the original miniseries, which I do want to do. But yeah, and my quick thoughts on both of these chapters, like they're very good, and I feel like these films they do a good job of telling the story, but there's clearly a lot of other stuff that's not fully developed or fully explained in the movies. And
Yeah.
it's one of those things where, like, while watching, I'm like, okay, well, I guess, there's more to this that that I don't know, but that is explained elsewhere. And so it doesn't bother me that that stuff is missing, but it is something that I picked up on.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. And that's where I am curious about your own response to the film, because like you get this with other, like there's been really big, very, very popular books that get adapted into movies. And then I'm I'm interested in the way people who are big fans of the books will then defend the films, but a lot of people who have not read the books will not enjoy the film. So I'm thinking, like, let's say with,
Right.
Harry Potter, for instance, or the Hunger Games, these are like big prominent examples, or even like Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings, if anything, kind of goes the other way, that people who love the books are
Mm.
not necessarily such fans of the movies because they're like, they left so much out, which
Right.
to me is that's not a good criticism of the film, because you just have to
No.
understand it's its own thing. It exists
Yeah.
on its own. It's not the movie version of the book. It's a film that is based off of a different source material.
Hmm.
But with Harry Potter, then there's a lot of it where it's like, oh, well, for understanding that character's motivation, if you've read the book, then you know. Same
Right.
thing with the Hunger Games. If you've read the books, then you know. And that's kind of what happens within a lot of Stephen King material. And I've watched most of the adaptations of Stephen King stories, and I've read most of his stuff. I forget, I've mentioned it before on the podcast. I don't know exactly how many books I've read of his. He's got something like 60 that have been published, and I've read about 46 of them, many of those multiple times. And I've seen, I don't know, almost every Stephen King movie there is to see. Um,
Right. Yeah.
and some of them work really well, but a lot of them don't work well. I would say most of them don't work well, and it's because his stuff doesn't adapt to the screen very well.
Mm.
Like I really don't think that it does.
Right. And I do think that, just going off of my general understanding of his work and films, which I've seen a number of films based on his work. Um, but uh, but yeah, I think in general it is because he he does put a lot of detail into the world building, and it's sometimes hard to do that in the film, or to capture all that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, there's a lot of detail, and I wouldn't describe it as world building, because Tolkien is somebody who
Mm.
does a lot of world building. Stephen King, to me, what he does better than just about any other writer I've ever read, and I do have multiple degrees in English, so it's not as though I don't like. It's not as though I have not read, the literary canon, the English canon of the of literature. I know the prominent works of English literature, but I think one thing that he does better than just about anybody else is characters. He develops
Hmm.
characters so well, where they are realistic, they are compelling, they're believable. You can like, even if you can't necessarily identify with them, but you can identify that it's a real person and you understand what's going on. You've kind of met people
Right.
like that, both with, and he's got the full range when it comes to, like, whether it's heroic characters or villainous characters. And what I really like is how well he intersperses intelligent characters and then average intelligence people and then lower intelligence people. Like, he's got the full range of humanity within his books.
Mm.
um Dickens kind of does the same thing, where he's just got this full range of socioeconomic demographics within his characters, like within all the characters that he creates. And Stephen King just does that really, really well. But the problem is that, and so it works so well in literature, because in literature, then what you're doing is you are, in many cases, it's not so much plot driven, it's you are following certain characters and you are
Right.
getting that inner monologue, and that inner monologue of what they are thinking, what they're feeling, what they're striving to do and hoping for. Stephen King does, it's a nice little trick that he has. It's not a trick, but it's a little device that he uses within his writing, where he uses italics to indicate that it's a character's thought. And so he typically is using third person limited omniscient narration. Typically, it's third person limited omniscient, where you're only getting some characters.
Right.
And but then he just mixes it in. He just throws it in all the time. Anytime you see italics, then you know. So it's a kind of effaced narration where you're inside the character's head, and he doesn't have to say he thought, he wondered. Just as soon as you see
Right.
italics, then it switches over into first person. Now, like I've heard, like some critics hate that. They think that it's, I don't know. They don't like it. I think it's brilliant. It works so well once you get into the book. But this is where the issue arises when you're trying to do a Stephen King adaptation, is that the books work so well as books because you're mostly dealing with inner monologue, inner thoughts, that
Mhm.
that stuff, it comes across as clunky and weird if you get exposition from characters where they're explaining what they're thinking. Would there be no reason to vocalize it?
Right.
Or,
Yeah.
and that's one reason why Stephen King adaptations usually don't work, is you just, the dialogue is not good and people will point to that. Or you have characters doing super strange things and it doesn't make sense unless you've read the source material,
Right.
because you don't have voiceover. And so
Yeah.
that to me is it. And within these films, though, they've stripped the story down, even though yes, it is 5 hours in length between the two movies, but they've stripped it down to, they've pulled away so much of the extraneous material that you really are left with mostly just the critical plot points.
Hmm.
um, and so it I think these movies are working on their own if you have not read the book. I
Right.
think, but I don't have that experience, so it's hard for me to evaluate it like that.
Yeah, no, I definitely think that it they do exactly that. And I think that one thing that really helps the films is how they're divided between, chapter one and chapter two. Chapter one being, all the kids when they're younger, and then chapter two being more mixed. And yeah, it's now about them when they're older, but we're going to see a lot of flashbacks to them when they're when they are kids, and that works really, really well.
Yes. And that's actually how the entire book is structured, is that it starts out really with them as adults, and then it just, you are suddenly pulled into the past where there's these triggers of memory, and then
Hmm.
they're jumping back in time, and then you get all of this backstory. And so it's interesting the way the films are developed. The way the first one is just the childhood story on its own, where you don't see them as adults or anything like that. But then the
Yeah.
second film, chapter two, that's what the book is like, where it's them as adults, but then jumping back in childhood, but for long, long sections, and then
Mm.
jumping back into the present. Um, and there are really significant reasons why King is doing this and why it's working so well, because so much of the book and so much of his writing in general deals with nostalgia.
Mm.
And it's this, and he loves this idea of, he talks about this, I'm trying to think of, I think it's the Dead Zone that he talks about this a lot, with the wheel, that life is like a wheel that you continue, like a Ferris wheel, right,
Mm.
that you have all
Yeah.
these different points, and that you just continue to come back to like various points in your life. And so you get this, it's very heavy in it, where you see this of the recurring threat of Pennywise to the town of Derry.
Yeah.
But basically, your life is going to go through like 2 or 3 cycles,
Right.
and
Yeah.
that there's this trauma that you get as a child, and things tend to get a little bit better, and some things are working, some things are not, but then you kind of go back to these like traumatizing experiences. And there's a lot to be said for that. Like, Stephen King is certainly not the only one. Like, he didn't develop this idea, he's just playing with this idea that has been around for a long time, that fate is like a wheel and life is like a wheel. And yeah, so the structure of it chapter 2, if you're wondering about that, of like, because I've heard some people, I haven't listened to a lot of criticism of the film so far, but some of it that I've heard is some people are like, well, why do we have chapter 1 if you're already going to get these long sections of going back to them as children?
Yeah, I can see people pointing that out, but to me it works brilliantly because you get um with with I think that if they had done it, across both films, then we wouldn't have gotten a good resolution in
Yeah,
chapter 1.
I agree.
And and it just would have felt, like
Yeah,
too much all at once. Whereas this way, then we know who all of them are as children. We've spent 2 hours with them, more than 2 hours with them
yeah.
in chapter 1, and then we jump right into chapter 2 with them all as adults. We introduce all of them as adults, and then we can start going back to those familiar faces of them as children. Um,
I
yeah,
agree. I
that
Yeah. No,
yeah,
I
that's
totally agree. Um,
yeah.
there is significant stuff that's missing from the book, which again, this is not a like, at some point then I might do something on my channel as far as like my booktube videos where I might really get into it. It's such a big text that's kind of daunting to take that on. Right, because I'll read like one of my Repairman Jack books. I'll read that and I'll talk about it for an hour, and it's like, but this is like 3 4 times as long.
Right.
And so like, I'm probably gonna have to break it up into multiple videos. And there's more complex stuff going on in here than in some of the other books that I've talked about before on the channel. And so, in any case, there's a lot that's not in chapter 2 that I kind of would have liked to have seen. I mean, it's a little bit of a criticism that I have of the film. Um, Essentially, I guess I'll get into it right now, because I think there's so much that I like and so much that's working, and then there's a little bit where I look at it and I say, I don't know if this is working so well. And there there's an element within, and he does this in the book, and you see it in the film. It's almost formulaic, where what's going to happen is you're going to go there's going to be you're going to have one of your main characters who's going to be having an ordinary experience, and you're going to establish what ordinary life is like for this kid,
Mhm.
whether it's like Stanley Uris in his, like, the synagogue, right? And then it's like,
Right.
yeah, he's here all the time, he's like studying for his bar mitzvah. And then it's like, and oh, there's this creepy thing, like this painting that he doesn't like, and then it's going to go from ordinary into creepy. And then oh, what's his name, uh, the chubby kid who ends up becoming uh,
Ben.
Ben. Yeah, that with Ben. Okay, yeah, he spends his time in the library. He spent a lot of time there, and then it's going to turn creepy, and et cetera, et cetera. And so it's like, but you just keep introducing that to each character, and then you say it's going to be ordinary life, and then it's going to get creepy, but they're going to be perfectly fine. They're going to survive this because they're our main characters.
Mhm.
And then it's like, so it does that once, and then you're like, now we're going to repeat this like 6 times. Next character, next character, next character, next
Right.
character. And then in chapter 2, then you get that. It's all right, let's establish what their ordinary life looks like. And I thought the film actually did a much better job than the book. The book sure takes its time establishing who they are now as adults. But
Mm.
in the film, I thought it was really swift, economic dialogue, and sequences to establish who they are and what's going on. With Beverly, okay, she's got an abusive husband. With Ben, he's a very successful architect.
Right.
With
And even I have to point out with Ben, I think that it is that scene is brilliantly done, where you've got the chubbier guy in that office who's pointing out the different plans, and he's maybe not as sure about himself, and then
yeah,
the other executive says like you know, hold on now, Ben, and you think that he's referring to that chubbier guy, and then it does that rack focus, I think, to show
right,
the TV, and then you're like, oh wait, that's Ben. So yeah,
exactly.
it's really, really
Um,
brilliantly done.
Yeah, it was. I did think that in the film, in chapter two, it worked so well. In the book, I've got some more issues with it, but the film did a great job of that. But then, okay, you guys have got to, like, you've got to go and acquire a token that Mike
Mhm.
instructs them to do this. Then you're like, all right, individually, one at a time, it's going to be you go have a flashback of nostalgia, and then it's going to turn creepy. And you haven't, but we know that they're all going to survive. That
Right.
So it doesn't feel like there's a lot of stakes. And then the only thing that we're really getting is if it's not one of our main characters and somebody's interacting with Pennywise, we're just like, oh well, they're a goner. Like that little girl under the bleachers. You're
Yeah.
just like, you're a goner. Like
Yeah.
there was nothing. So it's like you can just it's telegraphing everything. This scene is going to turn creepy and it's going to be individual characters and we're going to repeat the 6 times before they come back together. And
Right.
then it gets interspersed with, oh, well, this little kid we haven't seen before, and Pennywise starts talking to them. Well, they're a goner. And
Right.
there's not much more beyond that. You get a little bit with the bullies, but aside from that, that's basically the formula within the two movies. And that is
Mhm.
the formula in the book. He does it that way too in the book. But he's got more interesting stuff that's happening in the book. And I guess that's my point is that this getting into, and I think it's so hard to translate onto the screen to do it in an economic way. Like you can introduce these characters and establish who they are much more swiftly than Stephen King does in the book. But the stuff that he does about establishing who Pennywise is and the toxic effect that he has on this particular region, ultimately on Derry as a whole, that to me is what is so interesting in the book. Um,
Right.
it's not Pennywise necessarily as a character, although he is interesting. It's more how he is effectively this toxic force that ultimately is influencing people in ways that they are unaware of. And the film kind of points to that, but you don't get a lot of it. And I wish that there was more of that because I guess what I'm saying is at least it would be doing some stuff that is unexpected
Right.
because
Yeah.
everything else that you have in the film and horror should be unexpected. You
Yeah.
should be unsure, is this character going to live or die? Is this scene going to turn creepy or not? Like, are you know what I mean? Like there should
Yeah.
you should be like not knowing what will happen and who lives, who dies, when the monster's going to jump out. But instead, this is kind of telegraphing everything way before you get there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I think that is because like when I was watching it, I didn't have any moments where I was like specifically with chapter two, then I didn't have any moments where I was like, oh man, like or like I didn't have like jump scare style
Right.
moments like or anything that like really took me by surprise. Um, but and yeah, I think that is a lot of it is that it is very telegraphed in like it's like oh yeah, well this is the scene where it makes its first appearance. This is the scene where he uh takes the first child, and yeah, just all those things, which Yeah.
Yeah, and see, I think that bad critics, and this is like where I hate some of the language of it's not film theorists, but it's like people who are in the industry when they talk about beats within a film, within a
Yeah.
script, like within a screenplay, and then I'm just like, F your stupid formulaic writing. A
Yeah.
good screenplay should not have beats that are recognizable. Instead, it should be like, even if it's within the formula should not be obvious.
Yeah.
Do you see what I'm saying? Like, because you can look at a lot of films and you can say, oh, wow, that film actually does fit with Joseph Campbell's theory of the hero's journey. It actually does have like 11 out of the 12 steps on it. But the thing is, you need to work to figure out where that is. But it's like
Yeah.
if every bloody scene is, hello, you are an ordinary person. I'm going to call you to adventure, and then they get called
Yes.
to adventure. And it's like, hello, I'm your friend to help you along the way. And this is your first test. You're going to go up against it. It's like, well, we were defeated. Now we have to come up with a new strategy. Like, and some movies do that. Like, bad superhero movies do that so
Yes.
terribly. And so I hate that idea. It shouldn't be formulaic like that.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I agree 100%.
But executives think it's a good idea because
Yeah.
then you can point to it and you can say, well, look at this film. This film did well. And this is where the business side of Hollywood drives me crazy, where you don't
Yeah.
get this in independent cinema, but within mainstream Hollywood productions, then it's the executives who are ultimately having, I think, a disproportionate effect on creative decisions. And it drives me
Hmm.
crazy. You can
Yeah.
basically like just see it on the screen.
Yeah, and not to get, too off topic here, but with a lot of I think that that's a lot of um a lot of people's issues with independent film is that they have to work harder to
Yes.
figure it out. And so
Yep.
then they're like, "Oh, well, I don't really like those. I want to just be told, like, yeah, these are the main points and or the main beats." And they don't even know that that's why,
You
but no.
are 100% correct. That is exactly it. It's that they're easy movies, it's easy storytelling for simple minds.
Hmm.
I will defend that to the hilt. I really do mean that. I think it tends to be stupid people who enjoy commercial stuff and have no appreciation for independent film. And it's because their brain is just like, this is hard to understand. It's almost like reading my brain, and it's like, and I have the opposite problem. And I'm not trying to boast, but I do find that if a film is like, anybody experiences this. If you try to watch a children's TV show, you're going to get bored and your mind is going to wander, and then you're not going to be able to follow the plot. And it's not because the plot is too complicated. It's because it's too simple. So then you get bored and your mind wanders. And it's like, because if you watch a children's show with a little kid, you're not going to really pay attention for the entire time. And you're going to be like, oh, wait, what's happening? And the kid's going to be like, aren't you watching? Didn't you just see that blah, blah, blah? And then it's like, I'm not stupid. This is just, it's too dumbed down for me. It's not complex enough. And
Yeah.
I find that executives, and I really do think it's the executives, it's not the screenwriters, but the executives have no respect for the intelligence of the audience, the intellect of audiences. And so they just give us dumbed down tripe. And the more people pay for it, the more it's confirmation bias for executives of, we've got to go dumbed down. And I
Right.
think that there's a little bit of that going on with It Chapter 2. It's, well, everybody likes a spooky scene, so just have like every character, it'll be some creepy thing at the end of it. And instead, what I think would be more interesting, although I think it'd be more challenging to do on screen, but what you get in the book, and I think the best moments in the book, not even moments, it's lingering over the entire thing, is the effect that Pennywise is having on the town, and specifically the effect that he's having on adults in the town.
Right.
And so Beverly's father, the reason why he's creepy like that is because Pennywise has effectively corrupted his mind just from the toxicity of being near him. That
Hmm.
if there was something deep and dark inside him that was, spurring him to, molest his daughter, then it's like maybe that he would have been able to resist if he wasn't living in Derry. So it's not
Right.
Pennywise that did it, but it's basically it's essentially like I say, it's a type of toxicity. It's almost like if you're too close to like a radioactive fallout area, then you're going to start experiencing physiological effects. That's essentially what Pennywise is doing to the adults in the town and people who look away when they should stop these fights.
Right.
Which
Yeah.
they don't even really try to do at the beginning of it chapter 2. You kind of get in It Chapter 1 where you have the elderly couple who are driving along and then you just see the balloon that pops up in the back seat when when Bowers is like carving his name into Ben, into his stomach. Then it's like, then you just see them kind of like, we don't see anything. We're going to look away. And then the balloon comes up and it's like, that's what it's trying to point to. It's that it's not Pennywise, but it's the effect of Pennywise.
Yeah.
And that he's drawing energy from that.
Yeah, and it is I didn't, pick up on that, enough when I was seeing It Chapter 1 because I was not aware of that being a thing, and and it was not, it even like that one scene was the only scene that made me go, oh, like what was that about? Like, and um and then you had sort of, filled me in on a little bit of of that, so that did help. And then, with It Chapter 2, then I was more aware of that going into it. But there's certainly nothing that suggests, that the homophobic people at the beginning were, were influenced by Pennywise. Like they're
exactly,
and but there, yeah, and it really is like that is such a fascinating aspect to the story. I think that you can deconstruct that and look at like, well, yeah, Pennywise is in, the sewers, so stretching everywhere where the water, reaches, and it just very, very interesting that way. Um, and then, even looking at like Bill's parents in Chapter 1, where, his dad is like, no, he's gone, don't look into it any further. And it's like, oh, well, that's, something that, sure, he might have a little bit of a thought of like, let's just move on, but it's definitely being influenced by Pennywise to be like, yeah, you really don't want to look into it. And it's like, well, why not?
Exactly.
And,
yeah, and that's precisely, and to me the reason why it should come up and why it's so brilliantly done in the book, because a lot of people like, and I will defend this position to the hilt, that a lot of people in the book, like if they miss the point, they think the point is, boy, isn't Pennywise scary? And it's like, no, it's not so much that Pennywise is scary. Pennywise ultimately would have little to no power. I guess like really no power, because you see that in how he's defeated at the end of It Chapter 2, that he would have no power if individuals had no capacity for evil. He is drawing energy from the fact that we are capable of doing awful things, and that ultimately when we choose to do good instead of to do evil, then that's a choice that we're making. And the reason why goodness is so important and so powerful is because we don't have to choose to do good. We can choose to do nothing. We can choose to do evil. We can make good choices or bad choices. And so that's what makes it powerful. It's not like, well, it's the right thing to do, so I had to do it. It's no, you made a choice to do a good thing as moral agents, as autonomous moral agents. And Pennywise is not, he's effectively, he is essentially a demon, a devil type character, where he's not causing people to murder and kill and do these awful things. It's sort of like the devil giving you a shovel to dig your own grave. He's not going to do the digging. He might provide you with the opportunity and a tool, but you still have got the capacity to either go with it or not. And what's great about the story of it is that so much of it has to do with childhood and nostalgia, but ultimately the children in town, and because it's the children who are being preyed upon, the children are in some ways most vulnerable to Pennywise, but also have the strongest resistance to him.
Mm.
And so they don't, because they haven't been exposed to him as long, maybe that's part of it, or the innocence of childhood, but they're not really evil, awful kids, except for Bowers, the bully, and his group of friends, because there's some of that going on. But ultimately, there's something profoundly wrong with the adults in this town, with almost
Right.
every adult. There's something profoundly wrong with them. And the children are vulnerable not just to Pennywise every 27 years, they are vulnerable to abusive parents, to, teachers and, pharmacists and whoever else, right? That everything is profoundly wrong in this town. And so and it's because all of these individuals as free moral agents, yes, they're experiencing the toxicity of Pennywise, but they're ultimately making independent choices to do awful stuff, and then they're traumatizing the children, and that childhood trauma ends up manifesting in their adult years, who then traumatize their own children. And that's the fascinating thing. So Derry's a super creepy place, not because of the clown running around in the sewer, but because of what childhood trauma ultimately does and how it manifests in adults. And if you don't deal with that, if you don't deal with the trauma that you experience as a child, then you're going to end up either doing a lot of self-destructive behaviors as an adult, or you're going to end up hurting other people. Because
Right.
you've got like Eddie's mom, for instance, she's incredibly abusive to him to convince him that he's horribly sick, and
Yeah.
when he's not. Beverly's dad is, of course, horribly abusive. But the other things, you've got Bill with his dad, and how it's like, well, you've lost one child, but now you are not even present to be a father to your other child. And then
Yeah.
Bill is dealing with this guilt. And it's like, if you don't deal with this guilt, and Mike is dealing in the film, at least, and Mike is dealing with this guilt as well with his parents, right? That if you don't deal with this guilt, that to be able to forgive yourself and to say, I was just a kid, and it's okay, that you don't have to be messed up for the rest of your life.
Yeah. And even with, Stanley's father being like, "Oh, you're not studying, just put the book back because, you're not, you're clearly not going to learn this anyway." Like, yeah,
Right.
it is very evident when you look at, uh, specifically in chapter one, and it's, I feel like it makes sense that it's not in chapter two, but I would like to see more of it.
Yeah, like I would have preferred to have seen, like, because in chapter one, then I think one of the, like, you do have that one scene, like I say, where you've got the elderly couple kind of driving past, and that does happen in the book. Uh, but then in chapter two, like, there were places where you could have put it. Certainly when they with the hate crime at the beginning of killing the one guy, I forget the character's name, but the gay guy, where you've got the gay couple, and then they beat him to death and then throw him over the bridge.
Yeah.
That all they had to do is just show that there's a whole bunch of people around and they ignore it, right?
Right.
Whether, like, and I can't remember the scene well enough to remember if there were people around or not in the book, but it doesn't matter. The point is that you're getting the theme right, that you're showing that these people in town will turn a blind eye to evil acts. And that's ultimately what is so creepy and unsettling. Because if you think about that, what's creepier, is Pennywise every 27 years, or the fact that these children really are on their own, that you can't even trust the adults in town. You can't
Yeah.
go to them. They're not safe. They're not going to be able to help you. They're either going to not care and be completely indifferent to your plight, or they're going to ultimately hurt you in different ways than Pennywise would hurt you. And so you've got these kids who are growing up essentially orphans, and the people who are supposed to be protecting them are ultimately hurting them. And so you look at
Yeah.
that and you say, like, wow, that's a pretty profound and powerful theme that doesn't really get explored. And I'm like, and you could have, and I'm not talking about making a whole other film, but it's just you could have peppered it in just even a little
Right.
bit.
Yeah.
Because chapter 1 does that where, and it's fairly subtle. I mean, I guess it depends on you, like your ability to grasp subtlety. But with the pharmacist, when they're trying to steal the stuff, the like first aid supplies to go and help Ben after he gets cut, and then Beverly goes up to the pharmacist, and then she wants to try on his glasses just to distract him, and like she's like, oh, you look like Clark Kent, and you can see that it's really unsettling because he's certainly being creepy and pervy, and it's like it's a really uncomfortable scene, and it's like that's what you need to see is that that's Pennywise there. But I think executives thought that would just confuse audiences because they'd be like, wait, the clown is the pharmacist? And it's like, no, he's not the pharmacist. And it's not even that he's talking to the pharmacist or using him like a puppet. Instead, it's just the effect of him is causing that possible darkness that exists in a person to bubble up. Right? And every person has got weird like weird temptations and whatever that you struggle against, right? That if you're like if you've ever experienced road rage at all, and you're just like, just drive the car into the person, you know what I mean? You get frustrated, and it's like you don't do it, you resist the urge. But essentially the point here is, but if you were in Derry, you would do it. And you would do it because there's something in the town, something in the air. And it's effectively Pennywise corrupting the place since his arrival. And that to me is just, it's so interesting. And I feel like, it's such a missed opportunity to do something there where you could have kept most of the plot of the film and not really made it a lot longer. You could have cut down some of those, one person at a time, we're going to scare them. And then you start incorporating just a couple other things outside of this group of characters to show that everybody's a little off in this town.
Yeah, like you could have had, somebody interacting with Bill Hader's character, Richie. Is it Richie? When he goes to the arcade, he could have just had a small interaction with somebody out front before he steps in there. Yeah, just any little things like that. And I think that those definitely would have helped to, emphasize that there's something wrong with the town.
Yeah.
And
because another example is the house on Nybalt Street. In the book, then it's not a leper that attacks Eddie. It's a hobo because it's right next to the train tracks to like this. And so anyway, so hobos would go there and they'd sleep under the porch and whatever. And then basically this disgusting wino hobo who's, like he's totally sick and he's an alcoholic and he's, incredibly filthy and whatever. And he wants money to drink. And then he offers Eddie, who's, just a child, he solicits him for sex, and in order to get like a quarter, you know what I mean, like to get like an insignificant amount of money. And the thing is, think about this. Okay, yes, Pennywise would traumatize a child if they had any kind of interaction with this demon clown thing, but wouldn't it also traumatize a child in maybe much worse ways to be introduced to sex with an adult, and and in this case, like if you're not homosexual, to be introduced to a homosexual act at a very young age when you're not interested in that, you're not interested in sex, and then homosexual sex, like to be offered that, and then it's like that it gets in there, and then that just affects you in this really profound way, that it's like, and it would have been the same length. The scene would have been the same length, and it would have, but they went for the, the kid is kind of a hypochondriac, so just make a leper who comes after him.
Yeah.
And because it's it's not as challenging to audiences to do that, and it's a lot more straightforward.
Yeah. Um, yeah. All right. I want to I want to do like a little bit of a breakdown of each of the different main each of the individual going after the token sequences from
Sure.
It Chapter 2. Um, and specifically with, the leper in the basement of the pharmacy.
Yeah.
Um, uh, for one, I think that that would have been a lot more powerful if it had been, the hobo and everything.
Yeah.
That would have, uh, yeah, been much more effective. But even saying that, then I think that that scene is it's really good. I love, the whole, because what's that character's name? I don't remember.
Eddie.
Eddie, yes. Thank you. Yeah, Eddie, had an unhealthy relationship with his mother, and I think that
Yeah.
it's really great that we get to see that play out, with
Yeah.
him, like everything like that, and then the music that plays when the leper spews out the
Oh,
what
yeah.
was that?
That was like some serious Stranger Things 3 stuff going on.
Yeah,
There
it was just like complete like tonal whiplash.
and
Just
then it went, yeah, tonal whiplash, and then it went right back to trying to be creepy. And I found there were multiple moments in It Chapter 2 where there were attempts at comedy that failed. And specifically, there were attempts at comedy focusing on Eddie's character.
Mm,
And I'm not saying that you can't have two funny characters. It's like, well, we already have a funny guy. No group can have two funny guys, right? Because Richie is obviously the comedian in the group, like a professional
yeah.
comedian. And it's fine to have two funny characters, but just the lines that Eddie said at various points, that to me they fell flat. It was
Yeah.
bad timing.
Yeah, and not
And
only bad, like not only bad timing, but it's also just he I don't know, his character, like especially knowing his fate, then like it doesn't work as well. And it's such a stereotype. Like just, you know, like, oh yeah, he's the hypochondriac. Remember he's the hypochondriac, like,
yeah, yeah,
the germaphobe or whatever. And it's just like, yeah, I get it. You don't need to have all these individual scenes of him being like, oh no, there's a stuffed bear in the river. I don't want to even, touch it with a 3 foot pole. Like, I'm
right.
like, yeah, I get it. We can have, him sort of like ease his way around it without having to have an actual like and then somebody else knocks it out of the way. Like that was just
Yeah.
it's so over the top playing to those stereotypes and making it yeah, that just awful.
It's one of those things of, is it going to make a 15-year-old laugh who doesn't really know the material, and they're seeing it in the theater and they're with a group of friends, and it's like, yeah, probably. They're like, then put it in, because we need to pander to some of the audiences, like some of the audience who are the casual fans at best. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
somebody who's just kind of coming in, and it's just like, but again, I think it's not really respecting the audience.
yeah,
I think even for a
absolutely.
casual fan, it doesn't have to be that overt.
No, no, certainly does not. Uh yeah. So with all right, do you have any thoughts on Eddie's token scene?
Um, yeah, no, not really. Yeah, we'll move on to the next one.
Richie, and I feel like we're not going in order, but I'm just gonna pick randomly.
Yeah, that's fine.
I really loved the Richie one to the point where you know, got confused about like why we were spending so much time through this sequence, but like, it's something that we didn't really get in chapter one, which was Richie actually being really terrified by Pennywise. when he was younger, and I think that that works really well. But then now we get to see that where, the lumberjack,
Yeah.
Paul Bunyan statue
Yeah.
comes to life, and that is fantastic. That is horrifying. That's
Yeah.
it's really, really well done. But even, just like Pennywise appearing and floating with, the
Yeah.
whole set of balloons that, oh, really, really great. I
Yeah.
love that whole sequence.
Me too. And that's in the book, and it's not in the original miniseries, is the Paul
Okay.
Bunyan statue coming to life. And
Yeah.
I was so pleased to see it because visually it's really spectacular. It's really like quite the visual of, Pennywise up there with the balloons and all that in broad daylight and in the middle of the town square, that it's like you're not safe even here, even in broad daylight. It's
Yeah.
it's really, yeah, I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, and the other thing that I like about that is in it chapter one, then Richie, they're like, "Oh, well, what are you most afraid of?" And then he says, and he's in the town center and he says clowns. And like when he said it, then I was like, I feel like he's not being honest there, and I don't know
Right.
what he's really scared of. And so then
Exactly.
seeing this, then I'm like, oh, he's like scared of that giant statue. That's like
Yes.
actually fantastic.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, that I just found brilliant.
Yeah. Yeah, that part was
Um,
great. Do you want to talk about Bill and his sequence with trying to get his token?
sure. Oh, all right. Him getting the bike was
Yeah, just because I wanted to say, because you get Stephen King, who's got a cameo there, and
yes, and that is really, really great. I love that Bill is struggling with, oh, nobody likes the endings to my stories, which I know is something that Stephen King has
uh-huh,
been criticized for.
it is such a fun. If you're a Stephen King fan at all, then you go, I know exactly what you guys are talking about,
Yeah.
because that's just been a thing ever since the beginning, and it's a little, it's a little bit of playfulness with critics, with saying like that, because it's, on the one hand, it's, there's this fun little idea being introduced through metafiction within the film of, hey, Stephen King stories are great, but the endings often are terrible, because this comes up throughout it. Chapter two, it's not just in that, like,
Right.
the
Yeah.
secondhand story. It comes up multiple times. It's like, yeah, but the endings garbage. Like, Bill, you can't write good endings. Like,
Yeah.
some of them are okay, but mostly they're bad. And so it's like, on the one hand, it's like, all right, I'll take that like Stephen King's kind of, taking ownership of, I guess some of them are not great. But on the other hand, there's also this little jab at audiences and readers and critics of saying, so you only evaluate the quality of a book based off of the ending? That
Right.
if, let's say, 80 or 90% of the book was garbage, but it's got a great ending, does it then become a good book according to your standard? Right?
Yeah.
If it has a terrible introduction, but then the rest of the book is spectacular, is it a good book? And that's kind of, I felt like it's this fun little thing of like, okay, you guys can kind of like give me a little bit of criticism for my endings, but at the same time, are you guys really so shallow that you say the quality of something is how good the ending is? Because yeah, I thought that was a fun little thing that you had with Stephen King in there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That was brilliant, and yeah, just so well done. And
Yeah,
the fact that
because
like, I don't need your autograph. I didn't like the
right.
ending anyway. Like that's just, oh, it's so great.
Right, and that's
Um,
exactly, and that's the part I think that's so great, is just like, I don't want your autograph because I didn't like the ending.
right.
And it's this little thing of like Stephen King being like, do you see how stupid that is?
Yeah.
You guys are like and because like a lot of people will say that, like they'll say, oh, I don't like Stephen King because I read this and I hated the ending, and like I've heard that so many times of, oh, but his endings are terrible. And I'll be like, yeah, but I love 80% of the book, or I love 90 or 95% of the book. I just don't like the way it ended. And it's not even that it's like it was, oh, I don't like that that person died or that person lived. It's just they're really unsatisfying. It's just like that's not the right ending. It's just that's just, it doesn't feel right. Uh, but I'm still going to read them because I think that just because he's not necessarily writing flawless books doesn't mean that they're not compelling and enjoyable. And,
Yeah, it's about the journey, and
yeah,
and he writes an incredibly good journey.
he does.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
specifically with the characters. Yeah, not necessarily the plot, but most people just want
yeah,
to talk plot and they don't want to talk characters.
right, yeah,
Um,
um,
okay, so
yeah.
who was our next
I
character with the token? Because, or did you have more to say with Bill?
yeah. Well, okay. So what was? I'm trying to remember what was Bill's actual token because he didn't bring the bike down there,
No, he
and the
didn't bring the
bike was just
bike.
um. And by the way, that comedic moment I thought actually did work pretty well with the hard cut from him, saying like, she'll outrun the devil, and then like immediately he's
Yeah,
like trying
that
to
that
ride the
did.
bike. That worked
Yeah.
really well, except, and it's just he went to a whole other neighborhood of the
Uh-huh.
town in order to get on the bike. And then it like immediately fell apart. So I'm like, oh, you like holding up the scrutiny, then you're like, oh.
Oh, I feel like there's even more to it. You are right that like the cut does work really well in the moment, but then you're like, yeah, why did he go to a whole other neighborhood before he got on it? But then I'm like, my other question is, but then he's like really motoring on this bike, and you can see
Oh
he's
yeah.
hauling on the handlebars and all of that, and it's like it's fine. He got an
Yep.
Allen key like to tighten up the handlebars. Where did this happen? It's so dumb.
Yeah.
I got a little frustrated with that. And I did think that like the sequence with Stephen King, it was kind of nice to see him having a cameo in there. He used to do cameos in all of his films with like the made for TV movies, and then he stopped doing it with a lot of the films in the 90s. Like you don't have Stephen King in, The Shawshank Redemption or, like even Stand By Me. No, wait, he might be in Stand By Me, but The Shawshank Redemption, he's not in there. The Green Mile, he's not in there. It's not like, oh, there's going to be a really heavy, powerful film and then there's going to be like, hey guys, I wrote the book. So he
Right.
stopped appearing in his stuff and then he's kind of started appearing in it a little bit more. But I just thought that they missed an opportunity with making him a creepy character to establish
Yeah.
there's something profoundly wrong with everybody in town. And instead it's just kind of like, I'm a little greedy. I know that I can get the money from you and you've got the extra money. So just pay me extra money. Right. And
Yeah.
it's like,
And it wasn't even that much money.
it felt like no, yeah, yeah. um but yeah, so Bill's token ends up being the boat.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, so that's a very interesting case of like Pennywise giving him the boat. And you're just like, oh, okay. I guess
Yeah,
how else is he gonna get it? But it's just it seems pretty odd. Like if he hadn't, gone by that sewer, then he wouldn't have gotten it back. And what would his token have been then? Would it have been the bike?
right. And it's been a while since I've read the book, so I can't remember how much you get within the book, um in terms of all of that. But I think that really is because basically it's the book is dealing with, to some degree, it's cosmic horror. And cosmic horror is like these two, like, well, not just two, but like vast unimaginable um, beings and entities that exist in the universe, and we're so insignificant that they hardly pay any attention to us. It's really like Lovecraftian cosmic
Mm,
horror, although cosmic horror does not have to be Lovecraftian, but in this case it is. And so, anyway, but you do have other forces for good that are kind of helping the Losers Club,
right.
which
Yeah.
you don't really see in this, but that's what's going on in the book. It's that,
Yeah.
yeah, they're not entirely on their own when they're going up against Pennywise. And there is kind of this other force that's like, I'll lend you guys a hand.
Yeah. The turtle
So,
that keeps appearing.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah, and I really did love, trying to keep my eyes open to see those turtles. And they did a good job of it with it being like the Lego figure in the first one.
yeah,
And then even when they're like at the quarry, then it's like, oh, there's a turtle down here. And we don't
yeah,
get to see it, but just the fact that they're all trying to look at it. And then in It Chapter 2, then it was in one of the classrooms,
That's right.
sitting on the desk, and I was like, oh, there it is. Like,
Yeah. Yeah, they are
yeah,
nice little Easter eggs within the film that if
yeah,
you've read the book, then it's, and if you haven't read the book and you have no idea, then it doesn't like come out of nowhere. You're not like, standing up in the theater
right.
going, why is there a Lego turtle?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, but yeah, I really did. Uh, I love those moments, and even yeah. So Bill getting the token back, or the boat back, I think works well. You do get that creepy moment of him like kind of being pulled into the sewer. I just keep thinking like, man, why are there no, sewer grates on these things? Like they're so wide and
Yeah, well, and that's the thing is I'm assuming that this is just a little aside. I'm assuming that the sewers are like that in Maine, along like in these like seaside towns because of getting really heavy storms from the Atlantic, occasionally getting like tropical storms or hurricanes. Because in places where you do get really heavy rainfall, like I can say that like in Florida, then you've got that is how the sewers are here. But in like throughout the Northeast, not on the coast, but in other towns throughout the Northeast, like basically throughout the Great Lakes region, we don't see sewers like that at all. We don't ever get that downpour, and so I think that the ones in Maine do look like that. Because, like I say, like here, like if you want to get creeped out, just read it or watch the movie and then go for a walk in the neighborhood because you're going to see those storm drains everywhere.
oh man. Okay then.
Yeah, I'll point them out next time. Next time
All
you're
right,
here.
sounds good. Yeah, I did. I did actually see one here in Toronto, like along Highway 7.
Mm.
Then they've got them, and I looked at it and I went, "How is that a thing?" Because like it really does look almost like dangerous. It's like it's
Super
so like
dangerous. Yeah, that you
it's
could
so
see that
wide.
like
I don't understand this at all.
yeah, because you're like, well, the whole thing is designed so that way if there's heavy rainfall and it's coming off of the road because like in a place where you do get tropical storms or hurricanes, it's going to come down so fast and you're going to get runoff from everywhere else that if you don't have this massive maw to accept the whole amount of rushing water, then you're going to get flooding even worse than you're already experiencing it. But the thing is, okay, so all that water is going to rush towards that, and it's definitely big enough that a small child, if that child was caught up in that water, which a child absolutely could be, they're going to get sucked right into that thing and drown. And
Yeah.
I mean, I have not ever done the research on this, but there's no way that kids have not been pulled into sewer drains like that, like storm drains. There's no way it hasn't happened.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely.
So yeah, it's definitely like you look at it and you go, like, there doesn't even have to be a creepy clown in there. That just seems like weird, urban
Yeah.
planning.
Yes, absolutely. Oh man. Yeah, all right. But yeah, that's about all that I had to say on Bill's journey.
Sure. Um, so I want to we'll talk about Beverly last. Can we do that?
Yeah, that sounds good. Um, all right.
Um, do you want to talk
Ben.
about Ben? Yeah.
Yeah,
So he
his
goes to the
journey is
school, right?
yeah. And it's funny because he never buried, his past. He held on to that one note
Right.
his entire life. I really like that aspect, and it was something where in the movie I was like, okay, wait, I got a scene with him, but I don't see any token that he actually got. Like what what happened there? And then, at the end then I'm like, oh, okay, that makes a lot of sense that, because I didn't notice that like that's what he was keeping in his wallet at the beginning.
Right.
Like I saw that he
Right.
was keeping something there, but I was like, I don't know what that is. Like I just couldn't see it well enough, or it
Right.
wasn't on there long enough. But yeah, so that made a lot of sense afterward, and yeah, we got the "Kiss Me, Fat Boy"
We
line,
did. We did. Yeah.
which is very different from the from the miniseries, from what I understand.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, it worked better in this one. Um, yeah, I mean, there was, I don't have much to say with it. It was a pretty good sequence. It's just there's a little bit of I felt throughout these sequences that it's like we're not really getting a lot of surprises. Um,
Yeah,
it's just
yeah,
you know what's going to happen. You know that it's going to be down memory lane and a little bit of nostalgia, and then it's going to get real, real spooky, and then they're going to run away, and Pennywise is basically going to go ah, and then they escape, right? Like that's basically it. You're just
yeah,
like, does he have another move besides just, it's kind of like if you go to any like Halloween haunt kind of thing at an amusement park, that's
yeah,
basically what Pennywise does. It's like they'll get right up to you, but they're not going to touch you. They'll be like, rah! And then like
yeah,
if you just stand there and look at them, then they're like, ah, and then you're like, ugh. Like, go somewhere else. That's basically what Pennywise does with all the main characters.
yeah, yeah. No, it's yeah, I did like, the bit with Beverly in that scene though, where it was, um you did have, her January embers, her hair like actually like igniting and everything. I thought that that was pretty well done.
Well, the
And
one with Beverly I thought was good. That's why I want to talk about it last.
yeah,
Uh,
no, I just meant like in the bend scene though, like when her hair
oh,
like catches
yeah,
fire
yeah,
and everything. Um, but yeah, and it was like a little bit of a misdirect when, Ben leans in and then she like laughs and it's like, "Oh, like you thought that?" And I thought that that worked really well until, she said like, "Oh, how could I be with someone so fat?" And then I'm like, "Oh, okay, this is definitely Pennywise." And I think that that's how that scene is
exactly.
supposed to play out. So, yeah.
Yeah, and that is like one thing that I do think the film does actually pretty well to show his childhood trauma of being overweight. And and then the book you do get into the reasons for that, but he's overweight, and then that kind of lingers with him. That even though he's, as Richie or like Bill Hader like points out, like you're hot to
Yeah.
describe Ben, right? I really do like that when he sees both him and Beverly. And he's like, look at you guys. What the hell happened to me? Like, why do you guys look so good and I just look plain and ordinary?
Yeah.
But yeah, I like the fact that it shows that Pennywise is still using the same insult to Ben because Ben still feels like that overweight kid that no girl would be interested in, and he's not one of the cool guys, and he's into kind of like nerdy stuff. And it's like, even though the outer appearance has changed, but it's like inside he's not, like he's still got that in there, and that Pennywise is using that because he can see that inside Ben. Like it's all like, it's not done explicitly through dialogue, but it works. You can kind of catch it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, like with Pennywise like carving into Ben toward the end, then that does work really well. It's like, oh yeah, like that really did happen, because he was so fat and everything. And it's like, oh yeah, we can just cut into this flesh and it doesn't matter at all. Like, so yeah, bringing that back was really really good. Um, yeah. All
Yeah.
right. Um,
So yeah, we've talked Eddie, we've talked about Richie, we've talked about Bill, we've talked about Ben, and so Mike doesn't have one because he's been living in the town.
yeah. Yeah.
Because what
Well,
does he use as his token?
oh, it was the Rock that that like started the Rock fight or whatever.
Right,
Yeah.
right, yeah. Um, and yeah, and so you get that, and then you do get the like, and so you've got the sequence with Beverly, and that I thought really worked.
Yes. man, David and I, like the person I saw it with, right? Then, for those of you who don't know, David is my brother-in-law. But yeah, we were talking about it afterward, and we both were like, man, that really reminded us of M. Night Shyamalan's The Visit. Like,
Totally.
yeah.
Yes. Yes.
And it just
That's
felt
what it
like
is.
that entire movie just like played out in that one sequence.
You're absolutely right. Yeah, for anybody who has not seen The Visit by M. Night Shyamalan, if you liked that sequence with Beverly in the apartment, go watch The Visit because you're going to get an entire movie of that.
Absolutely.
Because you're absolutely right. That's just it. Yeah.
It's the, oh, this is a creepy old woman, but she's like a friendly old woman at first, and then it's like, there's something off. Is she just old, or is she actually creepy? And it's like,
And that's the thing, and that's where I feel like the film, and it would have been challenging to do, but I would have liked to have seen a screenplay that was taking more risks, that was trying to do more challenging stuff. If they showed that everyone in town is just a little off or a lot off, right? That
yes, yeah,
it would have been a lot less clear. Am I just dealing with this very strange, peculiar old woman, or am I dealing with Pennywise himself?
right,
And that's where there would have been discomfort and suspense throughout the film. And I
yes,
think that all those scare sequences would have worked better if you're just like, well, it's hard to tell what's real and what's not. Is this a mostly harmless person who's just really kind of creepy? Or but it's like anything creepy is just like Pennywise, and I'm like, there's so much more to this than that. um
yeah,
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 because I
no,
don't know about
absolutely,
you, but like I've interacted with elderly people a fair bit, and there are definitely things like, if they are dealing with senility, or if they're dealing with um oh what are all the
Alzheimer's.
Alzheimer's, but then dementia. Dementia is
Yeah,
like the one that, like, where it's not Alzheimer's, but it's, just their mind is just not
right,
quite there anymore. And
mm,
yeah, I've interacted with some elderly people, not even like personally interacted, but just like, like at like church events and stuff like that, when there's a person with dementia, and they just like, you just hear them like say things, and you're just like, oh, okay, like that came out of nowhere. Right? And then it's like these
right,
flashes of being completely, um, coherent, and then returning right back to, just not being there anymore. And that's kind of, I think it's such an interesting thing, and I wish the film did a better job of playing with that, whether it's Pennywise or not, because it's both in a film that's exploring nostalgia and, coming of age, the fear of your declining years, like the fear
mm,
of being elderly, and that's a real fear that people have, and it's not just that your body fails, but it's when your mind fails,
yeah,
that's a really upsetting idea. And if they actually treated it that way,
right,
where it's just
yeah,
like, it's scary interacting with somebody when you're just like, because you're both a little uncomfortable. You're like, I don't know this person. Are they totally safe? And then at the same time, you know, is that my future? Am I going to ultimately make people uncomfortable
mm,
around me? And that's it's and so you still want to have compassion for the person, but you also, like, if you don't know them, then you legitimately don't know if they are entirely safe or not. And
yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah, no,
like, I don't know. I guess
absolutely,
an example would be like, if like interacting with, with homeless people, where a lot of them have mental health issues. If you're in a big city and you just see them, they're like talking to themselves and they're acting erratically, and you're just like, I do have compassion for this person, but at the same time, I feel like I need to, protect myself, and so I should maybe kind of avoid them. And like, your heart kind of breaks, and at the same time, then you're like, but what can I do?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, no, Uh, I I really do think that that scene would have worked a lot better if we had seen a lot more of that, in the other townsfolk and everything. Um, and yeah, just the it's that scene works so well.
Yeah, it really does.
um,
The
it's
rest of them
so.
pale in comparison. None of the
Mhm.
other ones are as good as that scene. And I don't know if it would have been better because that I think is the first scene that you get of them going after their tokens. I'm pretty sure that's the
Um,
first one.
yeah, yeah, it is. Yeah. Um,
And then when she leaves the apartment and then she looks back and then she sees it's all fallen apart in it's been abandoned, then it's like, wait, what was I just in? That
right.
I can't trust anything in this town because I just saw this building being something completely different. I don't know if it works so well. Like, I know that it works really well. I guess I'm saying it works so well. So was it the best choice to have that be the first sequence that we get, or should it have been later on, maybe the last one that we get?
Yeah, I think that it should have been later on. I think that we could have seen. Yeah, I'm trying to think of what a better order would have been.
I think Bill first with the bike. If you and unless I'm getting mixed up, I
Yeah,
don't think that that one came first because I think that you should go from the one with the lowest stakes to the biggest stakes. That you should go basically from not scary at all
right.
to scary to very scary, as Pennywise has on the doors, right? That if they went
Yeah.
in that order, start with not scary at all, scary, and then very, very scary. Like,
Yeah, yeah, no, yeah,
because
that's
then you just know it's getting worse each
right.
time we're getting into this. Instead, you're like, oh, well, that was really creepy, and then you're like, oh, that was less so. That was like kind of funny with Eddie and like getting that weird
Right.
music in there. And like you're
Yeah.
just like it's just I don't know.
Yeah. Um, yeah. So, so I would like to talk about Stanley a little bit. Um,
Sure.
uh, I I love what they did with Stanley at the beginning, and I think that one of the reasons that it works so well is because um, we saw all of the Losers Club in chapter one, and the stakes were really high because any one of them could have died at any point.
Sure.
Um, and then uh, and then like right out of the gate with chapter two, then it's like, oh, and this one character is just he's not actually coming back. Um, and it's I think that like I don't know with how it works in the book, but I imagine that this works better than the book because you're not going back and forth as much, that you are spending all this time with him, as a kid, and you don't know that he's not going to be there 27 years later.
Mm, mm. Yeah, I think it ends up making the sequences in the book when he's a kid, it just makes them that much more tragic. Where you're like, this
Mhm.
is the kind of trauma that he just didn't recover from. The others, even though they were scarred, right? They're physically scarred, right? That
Right.
they
Yeah.
do that to themselves, and I like the fact that the scar childhood heal by the end of this, which I think is it's rather beautiful the way the film does that. Um,
Yeah.
but uh, but not everybody makes it. Not everybody's able to get over their own childhood trauma, and some scars they're too deep, and that's what you get with Stanley. So it ends up being a lot more tragic when you're seeing those moments with him when he's a kid and knowing that he just can't handle this again as an adult.
Right.
Um, yeah, but and the one and this is where obviously from the book that I thought would have helped the film just as source material, then Mike is really unsure if the ritual of Chud, I always thought it was like Chud, but it's got like the weird like two dots over the U.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah.
CHUD, and Chud is how he thing like that is how he pronounces it. That he is unsure if it's going to work because they don't have all of them. And he explicitly tells them this at dinner. They're like, well, or at the library, one or the other. And they're like, oh, but Stanley's not here, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, is this going to work without him? He's like, I don't know. And that there's that uncertainty, which makes the stakes feel like the suspense is even better, because then it's not, because in the film that he's just like, this is going to work, this is going to work, this is going to work. But instead it's like they
Yeah.
have to believe that it will work, and there can't be any doubt. But that when there's explicit doubt of, we don't have one of our members, so this might not work, it makes the suspense that much better. And I don't know why they didn't have that, why they couldn't have just, it was like, it would have been a line, maybe two lines, just like, Stanley's not here, is this going to work without him? I honestly don't know. Like,
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. That would have been really great to see in there, because it is, clearly Mike he felt that he needed to get every single one of them back
yes,
there, and then he doesn't really have any reaction to the fact that Stanley can't be
right,
there. He's
yeah,
not like, oh, no, 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 now we're all screwed. Like, he
right.
doesn't have a moment like that, and
But he
it's
does in the book. So that's what I'm saying. I'm like,
yeah,
they made a
that's
weird choice there. It's not like, ooh, that's a weird choice, but that's what they did in the book. So I guess they were trying to respect the source material. Instead, it's like
right.
they had an alternative that they dismissed. And I don't quite get how that ended up being better in their minds. I'm not sure.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's definitely an odd choice. Um, I do think that everything, to do with Stanley is absolutely beautifully done, where, you've got him and his wife, like, planning their trip, and, okay, it's finalized, like, yeah, we're definitely going.
Right.
And then he gets the call, and then, you just see him getting into the bathtub, and you're like, oh, wait, what's going on? And then you're like, oh, no!
Yeah.
Um, and, the way uh, that Beverly knew that that's how he was,
Yeah.
going to die, and the letter that he wrote to each of them,
Yeah.
the way that voiceover at the end is, oh, it is so perfect. Um,
Yeah.
it so perfectly concludes these films, this story.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I think that at the end was great. I thought the way they actually went after Pennywise as well, like especially if you've seen the original like mini series compared to this,
Yeah,
that
I started thinking about that. I'm like, how in the like they did not do anything close to this in the miniseries, I'm
no,
sure.
they did not even attempt it, because it's really getting into like the ritual of Chud is essentially because it's cosmic horror, then it's like a battle of wills, right? And so it's whose belief system is stronger, essentially, right? That is Pennywise with his, I'm going to use every tactic I have um, to cause terror in you, which just empowers me, compared to their belief of, we might be facing this childhood monster that seems unstoppable, but we're not children anymore. We are adults, and we are stronger, and we can, through the power of our mind, be able to dwarf you, to make you um, less than we are now, right? And I thought it was really well done, because that is essentially what Stephen King is doing in the book, which I thought, like, because like for all the criticism that I'm saying, and I still like, I really like both of these films, but for
Yeah.
all of my criticism of this one, where I feel like there's a lot that I feel like could have added some depth to this film, I thought the ending, they actually did it right.
Yeah, yeah, no, I loved the ending of this film. I thought that it worked so well, having, you know, yeah, just all of that with Eddie, being able to finally stand up to it, and then just being stabbed right in the back
Yeah,
immediately after. Even, just with them being like separated, and all, just dealing with kind of like a microcosm of what they had gone through before.
Yeah.
Um, and with yeah, those sequences are done so well.
As a sequel, one thing that I would say that I really sorry, go ahead. I'll finish your thought.
Yeah, no, I just like even like Pennywise, taking that giant like spider form
Yeah.
was really, really, really great to see him, not just be the clown who's, hopping over things to try to get to them or reaching out and not being able to grab them, but actually seeing him be like this monster
Right.
was really good. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And that is basically the way it goes in the book.
Okay.
And yeah, yeah, and it's great. Uh, I think as a sequel, because it's sort of a sequel, but it's sort of not, right? Like I don't even quite know what to do with it because they go together. To me, it's basically just one film in two parts.
Yeah.
But if you are treating this as a sequel, then I think that this actually does what most sequels attempt to do and fail to do, which is you are essentially covering the same ground, but you're going a little bit deeper and the stakes are a little bit bigger in a way that doesn't undo the original. And
Yes.
the way they go after Pennywise, because if you think about the ending of It Chapter One, and they go after him, and they go down into the sewer, and then through the complex network, and then they go into that big open room, this chamber, um, and then he's got that platform there, right? And then like when they strike him with the silver and all of that, and it's like, Prah! And then he kind of just slowly like creeps down into the hole, into that pit, right?
Yeah.
And so that in this one, there is that chamber that they go to, but we
Hmm.
have to go deeper and we have to go down to where he went before. And it's like we have to go to that place where it's like as children, we weren't willing to go down any further to make sure he's dead, or you know what I
Right.
mean?
Yeah.
Like they just kind of assumed he's dead, but I'm like, yeah, but you guys also were not willing to go down and check.
Yeah,
uh,
yeah, no, absolutely. It's as children, that was the biggest threat that they could possibly imagine. And now that they're adults, it's even bigger. And
yeah.
that means that, it still works so well in chapter one, with that being the ending where it's like, yeah, the kids, were able to stand up to the clown and put him down. And then in chapter two, then it is like, yeah, they were able to like actually like really, even though they weren't being personally threatened, then they did actually go after him for good.
Right.
And that's just, the like a difference in maturity that you see, and yeah, it works so well.
That's right. And I think if you're looking at it from a psychological standpoint too, then you can look at it and just say, like, as a kid, then you're like, oh, okay, I've dealt with this, right?
Right.
And then like you're an adult and you're like, I haven't dealt with this. And you're like, I've obviously got to return to this thing and really, really deal with it. And I'm just like,
Yeah.
because when people like, this is the thing is people who don't have an appreciation for horror and people who don't have an appreciation for genre fiction in general, whether it's sci-fi or fantasy or romance, whatever, like they just dismiss it outright. And they're because they don't watch it, they don't have an appreciation, and they just see it as the shallow thing. I'm like, this is not shallow. There's a lot going on here.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, I mean, having said that, there are some shallow horror films, but
Oh, of course there are. Of course there are. But with good horror, then
yes.
there's a lot um to explore.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, all right, I've got a question for you, and then I've got just like a couple other things I want to talk about. But all right,
For
I
sure.
want to know what is your favorite moment from these two films? Because I've got my favorite moment, and so
Ooh.
I know
Um,
it's a little
uh,
unfair because I had thought of this before we started, so I've already got mine.
no, I've got it. It's in chapter one when they are in the garage with the slide projector,
Yep.
and it just starts going through like by itself,
Yeah.
and he pops out of the screen just gigantic. My goodness, that is incredible. That's one of the greatest horror scenes I've ever seen.
Same here. And like it's that it went from a 2D film to a 3D film without having glasses on.
Yes.
I have rewatched that multiple times. I still don't quite understand how they made it look that way. It's just
Yeah.
I'm really that's my scene. I was gonna say that's my favorite scene from these two films, and I'm just like and I was so delighted and like terrified at the same time, but so delighted when I watched it in the theater with you a couple
Mhm.
years ago, and in part because in the original mini series, then they're flipping through a history of dairy in like the book, and I forgot because I haven't adjusted my camera since I changed rooms. So I'm like, you can't see my hands down here. So so they're flipping through this history of dairy book, and then like it's these photographs of dairy from way back, these black and white photographs, and then you see Pennywise there, and then it's like, and then like the thing starts coming to life,
Mm.
and it's this really great sequence in the original miniseries. At least as a kid, it freaked me out like crazy. This is like way before Harry Potter, with
Right.
pictures and books move, right? But the pictures in the book were moving, and then he's there, and then he kind of like jumps out of like the book, and then they have to like snap it shut. And I love that sequence. And then I was hoping that they would repeat that, but they did such a better job of it with the slide projector,
Yeah.
where I mean, like, and it's so creepy, and I've written
Absolutely.
a paper when I got my master's on horror. I wrote the paper specifically on Slender Man and all of the stuff online of the Slender Man phenomenon, uh, and specifically that lo-fi media is super creepy for the digital generation because it
Right.
adds this layer of authenticity. Like I said, I wrote like a 20 something page paper on this, on like what works in like why horror specifically uses this and how it's so effective. It's that anything that looks like you couldn't have faked it at the time. So if you're talking about like a Super 8 film, like if you're looking at like, M. Night Shyamalan's Signs, where you get like that,
Right.
found footage like moment of
Oh
the
yeah.
alien. Because
That
it
still freak like that still
right,
freaks me out.
right. Yeah. And Sinister, I want to make sure I get it right. But Sinister does this so well with like Super 8 footage in the film. A bunch of that lo-fi stuff is super creepy to a digital generation because we know exactly how easy it is to manipulate images on a phone or on the computer or sounds or whatever. But when you're looking at like a Polaroid camera, you're like, this can't get like there's nothing in here to edit or distort the image. And so
Right.
yeah, like
Yeah.
you get that like in The Ring, then you have that as well. Like the Polaroids come out and they're all like messed up, their faces. And
Right.
so
Yeah.
yeah, I like that's what works I think so well in It Chapter 1, where it's the slide projector and like Pennywise with like the because it's the mother, but then it's like
Yeah.
Pennywise with like the hair like this, and then just
Mhm.
and you're
Yeah.
just it's hard to not
Honestly, the size of that, like especially in the theater, but even,
yeah,
watching it later, like it's just the size of
yeah.
Pennywise coming out of there. Like you feel how big he must be in that scene. It's just,
And they're
oh
in
my goodness.
this garage where
Yeah.
they're because you kind of get that with the Paul Bunyan
Yeah.
statue of like how big it is, but you're
Yeah.
also out in the town square, and like you
Yeah.
get
He
that
has
with
so
like
much
Pennywise as a
space that he
spider.
could run away too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But in the garage, it's just like he's like the
Yeah.
size of the garage. Where do we go?
Yeah.
Like, what do we do? Um,
Yep.
yeah, I absolutely love that sequence. It's a little disappointing that we didn't get anything in It Chapter 2 that tops that or even rivals that. So
Yeah. But I mean, it would be hard to top that.
it's hard. It's really hard. Like that's the thing. I
Yeah.
really like that scene.
Yeah. I'm
Um,
also sad that we didn't get a return of Pennywise's fantastic dance from chapter one. Uh,
right. But I do love the fact that you got Bill Hader who like does the dance. He's like,
Yes.
remember how you would do the dance?
Yes.
And like, I
Yeah.
love the fact that he's joking about it. And when he pretends to be Pennywise when they're in the clubhouse, the under, he does
Yes.
a little voice. He's like, "Hey, come on, guys, we can't laugh about this." Like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, it was, oh, that was very, very good. I yeah, okay, so we haven't touched on the Chinese restaurant scene,
sure.
really. I think that it was a great reintroduction to, just what Pennywise is capable of. Um,
Yeah,
with it just being like, yep, just it can be anything. It can be a bunch of different things all at the same time. It can be personalized, to each person, and that is, yeah, it works really, really well. And then you have that moment of humor after where, Bill Hader just, yeah, just,
unleashes on the kid.
yeah. Oh man,
Yeah, I
that's
mean, I
really
felt
funny.
sorry for that kid. I'm like, he like who I think he would choose Pennywise over seeing like Bill again with James McAvoy. It's like, leave me alone, you creepy old, middle-aged guy. Like, you keep
Yeah,
following me around, you keep grabbing me. Like,
yeah, yeah.
but yeah,
And
this kid had the last couple days he had before getting eaten anyway, they were not good days. It's like you meet your
no,
comedic idol and he trashes you and he just screams at you. And then you're like going off to the carnival and then like some weird guy on his own like grabs you and talks about like getting creeped out when you're in the bathtub. It's like you hear voices when you're in the bathtub. You gotta stay safe. And the kid goes to the carnival and that dude comes after you and then you get
right.
this clown that eats you. I'm like, this poor kid.
Yeah, yeah. Let's not forget that Bill was also riding this ancient bike to add to the
Right.
creepiness
So
factor.
creepy.
What are you doing with this old bike?
Right. Oh my
It's
goodness.
it's a little too small for you, weirdo.
Yeah.
Have you heard any voices? Ah!
I'm hearing one right now. Let go.
Oh man. Yeah.
Uh, I've got one other thing that I wanted to bring up, but is there anything else you wanted to talk about?
No, I don't think I did love the funhouse scene as well. I thought that
Yeah.
was uh, beautifully done. Like I can only imagine, like how Bill would feel in that moment with him
Yeah.
being helpless.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, just oof,
It's
oof.
great because you get so much insight into Pennywise from that where he is because he's basically like a essentially a spiritual vampire where he's drawing energy from emotions and
Hmm.
from psyche, not so much from the flesh, right?
Right.
That
Yeah.
you see what I mean? Like a vampire is gaining sustenance from blood, but Pennywise is gaining sustenance from fear.
Mhm.
More or less fear and depravity and evil, and that's where he gains energy. And in that, he's obviously by terrorizing that child, he's getting energy from that, which is delightful for him. But the kid is really not important. What he's really wanting is he wants Bill to suffer, and he wants Bill to suffer in this like horribly psychologically manipulative way to remind him of how he didn't save Georgie and how he wasn't there, and that what Bill was experiencing in that moment, I think, was feeding Pennywise even more so than the terror from that kid.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
No,
yeah,
absolutely.
yeah. So
Um,
it's just it works really well of
mm,
seeing that Pennywise, he doesn't do this. He's not killing these kids because he's hungry. He's
mhm.
doing it because of what it does to the town.
Right. Yeah.
And that's where he's really gaining energy, which I don't, again, if you haven't read the book, then I don't know if that comes
Yeah,
across.
I don't with that scene in particular, I don't think that it does come across. I think that it does still, show a lot of insight into, Pennywise just really being after uh Bill,
Yeah.
but I mean he has the line in chapter one where he says, I don't remember which way it goes, but he says, like, I'll feed on your fear as I feast on your flesh.
Mm.
Might be the other way around, um, but yeah, I think that's a good summary of who he is because he clearly does, actually eat
Yeah.
people, but um, that's not the primary
No.
life
And
force for him.
and because you see that he only takes little bits out of people, right?
Hmm.
And that he allows most of the bodies to be found, and
Yeah.
parts of the bodies to be found. And it's like that's where it's like that's because like basically eating the flesh is only partially like it's like an appetizer for him, but the actual entree is the terror that it creates because he's essentially a
Yeah.
terrorist within this town. The terror that he is generating when they find a leg. You know what I
Right.
mean? That it's like what that ends up doing and the way the adults in town then end up being in various forms abusive to their children as a result of that fear over losing their children, right? That it's like
Yeah.
that's where he's like, oh, now I'm really like gaining strength.
Yeah. Yeah. And you do get the sense, at least got the sense that like because I think that some people point out it's like, oh, well, why does he eat, some people and other people, then he like makes float or whatever. And it's just like, well, he does still need flesh. It's not that he like that's at least like what I saw was
Yeah, yeah,
like,
yeah.
when he comes out, after 27 years of hibernating, he's like, I'm hungry right now. The fastest way for me to feed myself is by actually getting some flesh. And
Right,
then afterward, then I can start to spend more time, feasting on
right,
the fear. So,
right. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Um, okay, there were just a couple other things that I wanted to talk about. Oh, it's going to bug me because I had one that when you were bringing it up that came to mind, but um, oh, okay, yes. So just a couple interesting things because you've done this like on the podcast where we've talked about other things where you're like, hey, this is an interesting thing that a lot of people maybe don't know. But because I do know a fair bit about Stephen King, then one interesting thing is that something being profoundly wrong with Derry. Derry is a fictional place in Maine, but he said that he's only really been, as best I remember, this is when he was doing an interview for 11/22/63, which is about the JFK shooting.
Mm,
Uh, then he said the only town that he's really ever been in where he just felt like there's something profoundly wrong with it is Dallas.
huh.
Uh, Yeah, which she's since kind of apologized for that, saying, maybe it was just my experience. Maybe it's because I was doing all this research about the JFK assassination and then going to Dealey Plaza and seeing where it happened. And it's like that something really like kind of messed up happened there. He's like, maybe that's what it is, but that's big in 11/22/63. It starts out in Derry, Maine. The main character, he starts there and something's really messed up with Derry, but then he goes to Dallas and it's like even worse because Dallas is
Mm,
a big city and there's something just deeply wrong. And it's like, of course, it had to be Dallas where that happened. So it's an interesting thing for anybody to think about, depending on how open you are to the idea of an entire town being off, right? Haunted in some
right.
way or just makes you uncomfortable. But I always think about that because I travel a lot and I go through towns and I'm just like, is this one like Derry? Is this one going to creep me out? Right? Like, because if you've
Right.
got like that, you know what I mean? If your spidey senses are tingling in a town, I would say you probably shouldn't stay there for the night. You
Right.
definitely shouldn't move there, even if you get
Yeah.
offered a job. But yeah,
Yeah.
basically, like Stephen King is in pointing that out, like, it, as much as this is a piece of fiction, it's also like, yeah, you should be a little cautious because there are some places that are just a little off. And
Right.
yeah,
Yeah. I do, believe that we can pick up on some of those things, where it's like, there's something just not right
yeah,
here. Not
yeah,
necessarily with, a whole city or town, but, just in general, sometimes you can
sure,
step into a place and just be like,
absolutely.
I don't feel right here.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. No, yeah. I've had moments like that, plenty of times, and it's it doesn't even necessarily mean that it's like a supernatural thing. It could just be that you know there's some dangerous individuals, and you're just getting some creepy vibes from them, and it's just like, in my experience, it's probably best just to avoid those situations, right? Like, listen
Right.
to that voice instead of saying like, "Shut up, brain."
Yeah.
You're never going to be in danger. Nobody ever,
Yeah.
ever. Instead to be like, I don't know. Maybe this is how those news stories always start. And I just ignored it.
Yep.
So there was that. The other thing I watched, and I stupidly watched. I didn't even finish the video. I don't think, but Screen Rant had a video of like the ending of It Explained, and I shouldn't even like mention their channel name or whatever, or the
Yeah.
video title, because. But I mean, whatever. It's not like I'm going to be driving a lot of content to it because they've got like views to it. Um, I watched that stupid thing. I'm like, well, for one thing, what needs to be explained? It seemed pretty
Yeah.
damn clear to me. It wasn't. So I'm like, what? Why would anybody even need that? And then second of all, like, it's how stupid are they? Like, I don't understand the people who are making the content for some of these big YouTube channels where I'm like, this is the shallowest like stuff ever. It's like a grade 9 report. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Because they were like, oh, like Pennywise being a clown, is it because he saw this guy back in the 19th century, Pennywise the dancing clown, and then was like, I'll be that guy? And then it's like, and why did he choose to be a clown? Well, because clowns are super creepy. And I'm like, if you know, like stop before you hurt yourself, because there's plenty of stuff out there, both in the book and from what Stephen King has said, that the reason why Pennywise is a clown, and he certainly has undone this through it, but the reason why he's a clown is because children are drawn to clowns. And that they are these fun characters where it's like, basically, if Pennywise was just a regular ordinary person and he's like, hey, I've got a balloon, or hey, I've got candy, then kids would be like, stay the hell away from that, stranger danger. But
Right.
a clown is an entertainer, and specifically a clown is an entertainer geared towards children. A clown is not an entertainer geared towards adults. And
Yeah.
so if you think about that, what other entertainer is specifically geared towards children except for a clown? And so that's how he's kind of luring the children to get closer, to offer them a balloon, where it's like a clown. If you've ever been to like a circus or a carnival or something like that, then they will have people who are dressed up who will sometimes offer things. And if the
Yeah.
person's in a costume, like, you go to Disney, they're in costumes all the time, right? And like occasionally then they'll have them do stuff like that where the person in the costume will hand stuff out. Even like something like Santa Claus, right? He's like
Yeah.
a guy in a costume who will give you a candy cane. It's like, don't ever take candy from a stranger unless it's Santa Claus, and then you can absolutely eat that candy. And
Right. Yeah. Now I'm
that,
imagining a
so
whole version of it where it's actually Santa.
they should, the Christmas version of it.
Yes.
They should do that. That'd be fun. But um, yeah. So the thing is I'm like, it's really obvious in the book that that's what's happening. But
Mhm.
I gotta say, I feel like Stephen King fixed that. Like, there's at least an entire generation now, like, who from a young age, and even if you've just seen the cover of it, or if you ever see a trailer on TV, like, I guarantee you, like, a 6-year-old, if they see a trailer for it on TV, even just a tame one, they're not
Yeah.
going anywhere near a circus clown anymore.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So
No,
he's
absolutely.
So Pennywise would have to get a new outfit if he were to come back, is what I'm saying.
Santa.
Because I don't think kids are. Yeah, Santa. Exactly. Santa would work. Everybody's like, it's so dumb. Who would go clown? He's clearly evil. And I'm like, Santa's creepy as hell. And everybody like is not only like running up to him, they're like, can I sit on your lap with my back to you? Like,
Right.
this guy could do anything. And parents encourage it. They're like, no, sit on Santa. I'll take a picture. It'll be your last. Yeah, so I don't know. I was just a little frustrated. I'm just like, why do people make this content if they don't know what they're talking about?
Yeah, I don't understand that. I watched a little bit of Screen Rant's pitch meeting for It
Oh, I
Chapter
haven't
2.
I haven't watched it yet. Is it good?
Okay. Uh, it's okay.
Yeah. I find usually if it's a movie that I hated, I usually love pitch
Yeah,
meetings. And if it's a movie that I love, then I'm usually like, stop it.
right. Yeah. Yeah,
But
but there is like a little bit
and
of
I find that it's like,
sorry. Yeah, there is like a little bit of I, I don't know. There's a little like he brings up like the familiarity or the not familiarity, uh like the fact that we do that 6 or 7 times, and it's like, well, yeah, the formulaic structure of the film, like he kind of mentions that um in the video.
hmm.
um
Oh, okay.
and oh man, I'm trying to think of what else he brings up. Yeah, I mean, it's fine. The Oh yeah, and they also bring up like, yeah, now Beverly has powers. What do you mean she has powers now? And it's like, oh yeah, she can like kind of see how everybody's gonna die, and it's like, wait, where did that come from? And I'm just kind of like, it's super obvious where that came from.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. And
I that does not need to be picked apart at all.
right. And that, like, yeah, like I say, I mean, usually if it's a bad movie, then usually I agree with the criticisms because I'm like, yeah, there are probably like big gaps in logic.
Yeah,
But in other things, when it's a movie that I really like, then I find like if it's a well written, well directed film, then I'm usually like, you just try like I don't know. That's my whole thing. I just
yeah. But I would like to mention Bowers briefly.
sure, yeah, because
I did
that's an important character.
Yeah, I did not know that he was going to be in chapter 2. I
Oh,
totally
okay,
thought that he was dead in
gotcha.
chapter 1. And I thought that it was a really nice, more or less surprise for me to, like to see him back and to see, that he was like arrested immediately after like he
Yeah,
came out of the sewer. I was like, okay, yeah, because things in Derry start to more or less return to normal, and they're not
exactly.
going to look the other way with that. And then him like following the balloon when he's like in the
That was a
prison.
really great sequence. That really was.
It really was, and like yeah, I really enjoyed that. And then like he gets to the room and he's looking out the window and he's like, "What? Where'd the balloon go?"
Right. Right.
It's like, "Oh, it's under the bed." Oh man.
Well,
Um,
yeah, and that is in the book, and it's in the original miniseries as well. But, or sorry, I don't know why I said original series, but like I'm just saying, like the first like miniseries that you have.
yeah.
Not that it was an original piece, but it's anyway. You do have Bowers in there, and you see the effect that Pennywise has on him and how it's different than the effect that it has on other children, because most children are able to withstand, like they're basically invulnerable to the effects of Pennywise. It's not like, oh, because they're growing up in Derry and Pennywise is so evil that kids therefore become evil. It's that the adults, because of all of their trauma, gets aggravated by Pennywise and they start doing strange things. But children, because they're so innocent and they haven't really experienced a lot of that misery and trauma in life, then they don't get corrupted by Pennywise. But the reason why Bowers does is because his dad is so abusive to him, and there's kind of an indication that he's a psychopath. That there's just something, like, whether he lived in Derry or not, whether Pennywise was around or not, this kid was going to be messed up.
Right. Yeah.
And so to see the way Pennywise then just exploits him like a puppet, like a tool, and he just gets him to do awful stuff. And then, his mind gets all messed up from the influence of Pennywise, and then he is in a mental, like in a psychiatric facility for 27 years. And then, gets out because Pennywise is back and is delighted by this. It's
right.
I kind of I hesitate to bring this up, but it's almost like the crazy people in Bird Box, that awful movie. You know how the crazy people, they're on the side of the whatever monster.
Yeah. No, that's
it's sort of it's basically that.
Yeah. So it was also interesting to see Bauer's old friend back as well, as a zombie, driving the car at the one
That's
point.
Right.
I'm like,
That's
wow,
right.
This is like, I did not
He's
think that
man.
was possible, but okay.
Right.
Did not expect to see that when I went in to see this film.
Yeah. And that's the thing. And that's where it's like, if you established, because I think if you don't get the fact that there's something messed up with the town, that Pennywise is having an effect, then wouldn't you just be yelling at the screen going, how are people not looking at like Zombie Driver over here?
Right.
Like, and I'm like, it made sense to me. I'm like, yeah, I get it. But I'm like, but do other people get this?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
and I absolutely love, that Bowers dies the way he does, more or less. Like it was great to see him, attack Eddie there, and then have Eddie strike back, but he does it, behind the curtain, right? Like, so that he can't really see what he's doing.
Yeah.
And then that doesn't kill Bowers, right?
Right.
Like Bowers falls out of the window or whatever, and yet he
just
takes the knife out. I really love that scene.
Yeah.
Then and then he comes back later and then axe to the head. Oh man.
Right.
That's just good.
Yeah, and I was happy that they included that, because you get to see how that Pennywise is both a supernatural threat, but he's also using physical threats as well, and actual people. It's not just these, mind games that he's playing, and you can't just fight him with your mind, that he is going to manipulate people into attacking you as well. That to me is what makes the whole town, this whole setting, so interesting, which you only half get in the movie, but that the entire town should feel dangerous. Okay, so are we basically done? I've got one other thing, but it's fairly brief.
I feel like I had thought of something else at the one point, but at the moment, I'm good.
Okay. Yeah, so the last thing that I'll say is, so my next book, very likely, I'm working on it, but my next book is, I'm planning to release it this fall. Sometime in November. I am working on final edits and cover art and all of that. It's called Off the Rails. Now, Stephen King's It is one of the influences for the book. And I had an editor point that out. She's like, noticing the influence on the book. She was not, she's not a big Stephen King fan, so she didn't she was only catching shallow little allusions between the two. And anyway, I'm saying that there is a little bit of that, and it's not imitation by any means, but there is a little bit of homage to some elements of Stephen King's It. But I would say it's probably that mixed with Pet Sematary, would be, and I would say Pet Cemetery is probably the much bigger influence on the book than It, but a lot of people from a shallow perspective are going to see Stephen King's It. And so I just figured that I would bring that up since it is my channel and it is my podcast and I am an author. So I'm like, well, I'm going to use this. And I figure most people have probably clicked off at this point. But I do want to point that out, that if you do like Stephen King's It, then I do have a book that is going to, like I say, that where it is one of the influences. It's not the only one, but it's one of the things that influenced me when I was writing it. So if you like it, then, maybe you'll like my next book.
Cool. Yeah, I have not read it yet, but I am super excited to read it, and yeah, hopefully other people are just as interested.
I
It's
hope so too.
the general description would be, um, or do you not want to give that away yet?
I don't really mind giving it away. It's just I don't have the perfect description for it yet. Like we getting the back cover copy done and all of that.
Mhm.
But essentially, it's I don't have a big cast of characters the way Stephen King does, and so it is kind of a big messy book in that way.
Mm.
He's kind of pointed to that where it's like just because you've got it's a little unwieldy at times when you've got all these different characters. So mine is more of a portrait than landscape. Do you know what I mean? Where it's
Yeah.
really it's like
Yeah.
one person that we're really focusing on instead of this whole a landscape painting where there's just, oh, look at all of these different things that are happening all in the one painting. And so really it's basically it's they're the villains in the book, and the one villainous character in particular, it's from a very unsettling circus from the 19th century with creatures that cannot possibly be real that travel around from one small town to another, and there's it kind of ends in a disaster, and that's kind of the backstory with the book. But then the present events that really the book focus on is that the circus is not finished traveling, and this couple moves in to a house right beside the train tracks where the circus had visited previously, and basically the longer they're there, the more real it becomes. And so
Okay.
yeah, that's me being fairly vague because I'm not sure about the marketing yet with like the exact angle that I want to take, and I don't want to give too much away, but yeah,
Yeah.
but that kind of influence of like seeing like Pennywise with the circus in the 19th century, it's like that was overt. I did that on purpose. It's like I love that part of it. I love the history of Derry. I've got some some scenes in the book where you do get into the history of my town in
Cool.
this book, and you see like, whoa, some weird stuff happened then, and it looks like that stuff is happening again now, but nobody really seems to quite want to talk about it. And so I like that element of it, and so I did incorporate that. Yeah.
Cool. All right, that sounds great. Um, you know, I hate to not end on that, but
That's okay.
I want to ask about Pennywise's backstory because we get, these scenes of um, Pennywise with him like putting on makeup and everything.
Yeah.
Uh, and and also like all the the meteor or whatever that brought
Yeah.
Pennywise to the town in the first place. I really love all those elements, and I do all of that makes me more interested in reading the actual novel because I feel like it must be there's more to the story there, and
There
yeah.
really is, and the this is where my knowledge of the Stephen King universe is a little bit limited, because he has got his books are not, they are kind of all in the same universe, and he does have some characters and some little allusions and references in the books where it's like you're reading this book over here, and it's kind of got that character who's a peripheral part of the story that's in this novel over here. But as far as the Stephen King mythos of what's going on a supernatural level with all of these different things happening throughout all these different books, it really a lot of that comes up in the Dark Tower series. So
Okay.
there was the Dark Tower film that came out last year with Idris Elba and Matthew McConaughey, right? Matthew McConaughey was
Hmm.
the other star, was he not? Yeah,
I
I
believe
haven't
so.
seen it. And basically, it's a fantasy and really like a dark fantasy series that Stephen King has been writing since the 80s. And I forget how many books there are. This is my point, though. I know that there's some stuff about Pennywise that comes up in the Dark Tower series. One of the reasons why I say I have not read all of Stephen King's stuff is that I intentionally have not read the Dark Tower series because I basically want to read everything else and then read the
Mm,
Dark Tower. That way I catch as many references as possible.
gotcha.
So that's my plan. I'm like, oh, but I still haven't read that book, and I'm pretty sure there's references in the Dark Tower to that book. So I need to know all of these different ones. I'm like, I've got to read like 55 before I read the other 7 or 8.
Right.
Is basically my reading plan with it. So I believe there's other stuff with Pennywise in the Dark Tower series. Then there is a lot about him. Even just his name, like Pennywise is like only one of the names that he uses. Bob Gray is the name that he uses probably more than Pennywise. And Bob Gray
Hmm.
is really like when you're reading it, like that one creeps you out even more than Pennywise. Pennywise is just a persona. Um,
Right.
but yeah, there's a lot to him, and it's really, really interesting. Yeah, I love that aspect of the novel.
Yeah, yeah, I did like getting, those little bits of backstory
Yeah,
in chapter two, and I think that they work decently well to show that it's like, well, yeah, there is a lot of history here, without, you know, needing to bog down the film, which I mean the two parts of this film are already quite lengthy, as we've mentioned, like 5 hours together. That's a lot.
right. And I'm just kind of thinking just off the top of my head, and I can't be the only one who's ever come up with this idea, but if Warner Brothers wants to ask me to write a screenplay, I certainly
Mm,
will. That if you took the interludes in Stephen basically in the novel itself, then you've got Stephen King titles them interludes, and it's really Mike Hanlon, the librarian. Then he's been doing a history of Pennywise throughout Derry's history. So he's specifically looking at this, trying to see all these instances, because there's been like, every 27 years looking at all of these awful summers, because it's
mm,
in the summer every 27 years, and then tracking it and figuring out all of these awful, awful things that have happened. And so each one of those interludes focuses on one of those. It's basically you're getting, because in it, you're getting two. You're getting one when they're kids, and then 27 years later when they're adults. But this has
yeah.
happened before, and like, so that's what the interludes are. So I would say it might be an interesting thing just as a reader that if you're like, oh, it is so gigantic. I know the main story from the film, but you
Mhm.
want more backstory. Just read the interludes. Just go
Okay.
through the book. It's titled in there in the table of contents. I'll bet you that'd be amazing, and it would only be like 100 to maybe 150 pages. But if you just read the interludes, you're going to get all of Pennywise's backstory and these
Cool.
interesting things that don't deal with the Losers Club. And that's why I was saying, so if Warner Brothers wants, I will write that screenplay and then you release it as a standalone, because that'd be spectacular. Because then you don't have to worry about all this other stuff of like with the casting of all these different characters. And I think it'd be a super cool movie.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I am definitely planning on doing that. That's
Yeah,
that
just
sounds like a great
yeah. Let me know how
great
it goes
idea.
because it would hold up. I know that it would hold up. You because especially if you already know from the films that you already know what happens with them, then
Right.
if there's any references within Mike's story to them and what's going on with them at the time, you would understand what he's talking about. But really, it's him documenting the history of Pennywise.
Cool. All right,
Yeah.
that sounds great.
There you go, people. That I think legitimately that was a good suggestion
Yeah.
of how to. Cause what do you do with a book that's like 1,200 pages long, and that you're just like, I don't know that I want to commit myself to that. And I've already seen the movies and whatever. But yeah, that's what I would suggest. Just read the interludes. Get it from the library. You don't have to buy a copy. Just any public library is going to have a copy, or you can do like the interlibrary loan or used bookstore.
For sure.
Yeah. All right. Well, I guess we're done, right?
Yeah, that's those are our thoughts on It Chapter 1 and Chapter 2, as well as a bunch of other little
Yeah.
side bits.
I'm sorry. It is tough for me with Stephen King because I'm like, I
No,
do
no,
have
I totally understand and I appreciate it. I loved everything that we talked about. That's
yeah. Me too. I'm glad. All right, folks, feel free to comment below any thoughts that you have or questions or anything like that. And we'll see you next time. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.
Hey.
Ignore the bell, people. We're gonna keep going. We're still ignoring it. Don't worry. I don't know what that. I think that's the fire drill. All right, we're gonna go home. Yeah. All right, we're done.